Well, I have the joy of getting things started this evening. I'd like to say welcome to all. Hello, I'm Allison Green Myers. My pronouns are she, her. I am the program director here at the Highlights Foundation, and I'm joining you from Northeastern Pennsylvania on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Lenape Nation. Welcome to this month's HF Gather. A note for all of our attendees, this is a webinar style gather. So our special guests this month cannot see your video or hear your audio, but they can see you in the chat and in the Q&A box. We are recording tonight's session and we'll be adding captions to our recording within 24 hours and sending that out. We hope that those in attendance now, as well as those who are watching the recording, will help us spread the word about the good work of Rise Home Stories Project and the incredible talent of their creative team. If you are here with us live, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. You can ask us questions about the stories. You can ask us questions about the program. You can ask general questions, and we'll answer what we can in print, and then we'll move as many as we can into the live Q&A, which will follow the panel. Just a reminder that in these spaces, in the chat, the Q&A box, in our webinar tonight, all of our highlight spaces, we strive for a safe and inclusive environment. We ask that you join us tonight with no hate, no harm, and no harassment of any kind. Let's grow in tonight's conversation together with appreciation and respect. As you know, at the Highlights Foundation, our mission is to positively impact children by amplifying the voices of storytellers who inform, educate, and inspire children to become their best selves. And this month's HF Gather is a celebration of the way thoughtful, passionate caregivers impact and empower children to become their best selves. The Rise Home Stories Project is working to transform the world for the better through stories and multimedia projects. And I know that you all who have gathered here feel that mission and you're ready to learn more. On tonight's panel, we'll have a chance for some more formal introductions, but briefly, I just want to say hello to all of our panelists from the Highlights Foundation. Thank you for your important work. Thank you for being here with us. We're so excited to get to talk to you. Before our panel with the entire creative team, we get to turn our welcome to Luisa Dantas. Luisa is a filmmaker, a writer, and the wonderful storyteller who will open our Rise Home Stories Project celebration tonight. So with that, welcome, Luisa. We're so happy to have you here. Let's get started.
Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, George. Thanks for creating this space, this amazing container for what I think will be a great conversation about this very exciting book that's coming out into the world on August 10th. Alejandria Fights Back, La Lucha de Alejandria. My name is Luisa Dantas. I'm based in New Orleans. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm going to give you a little bit of context and background on the Rise Home Stories project before I go into starting this conversation with this amazing creative team behind this book. The Rise Home Stories project is in its 4th year. I'm sorry, my dog is going crazy. Hold on 1 second. The joys of Zoom. Sorry about that. So the Rise Home Stories project is in its 4th year. It started as a cohort of 16 organizations that work at the nexus of land, housing, and racial justice in the US. And we started out thinking about what are the big narratives, what are the sort of deeply embedded paradigms that are keeping folks from achieving the vision that they have for a just future in all of these areas, and really thinking about race, land, and home. And we spent some time together figuring out what are the stories that are working against us and what are the stories we want to work toward. And then we partnered with amazing creative storytellers from all over the country journalists, writers, filmmakers, visual artists, to create a body of work that is putting forth this vision that we've spent so much time sort of conjuring up about a future that is just and equitable. And so we have a body of work that we're launching into the world slowly but surely, and will be done launching in the early fall. And it's 5 projects, of which Alejandria is one. So a children's book, a video game called Dots Home, a podcast called But Next Time, an animated web series called Mine, and an interactive experience called Steel Estate. So all of these projects, this body of work, they share connective tissue and DNA, which is really this analysis that we have, that we cultivated as a group, as a cohort, of what are the stories we want to lift up, including abundance, collective action. What does justice look like from an intergenerational and multi-generational perspective? And so that brings us to Alejandria. Our dream audience for this book is children from the ages of 6 to 10 and their caregivers, right? So we're really trying to take this story that is essentially about a young girl who is in a neighborhood that is where displacement and gentrification are running rampant, and she's finding that her home is in danger. Her family is in danger of losing her home. And she first investigates to find out why this is happening and how this has been allowed to happen, and then takes action by coming together with her neighbors, with her neighborhood, with her community to speak out. And so the impetus of this has been the real world work and issues that this cohort of amazing grassroots organizations and advocates does on the day-to-day, the battles that they fight day-to-day. And that experience, that lived experience and that knowledge is what gave birth to these beautiful characters, inspired these beautiful images that are the world of Alejandria. So today's panelists are going to speak to the very unique creative process that helped birth this book, and a very unique creative collaboration between artists and advocates and people who don't usually identify as storytellers and professional storytellers. And so that'll be sort of the meat of what we talk about today. I'm going to turn it to the panelists really quick to give self-introductions, if we could keep it to about a minute, and then I'll start asking some questions of individual panelists.
Should I go?
So
next?
Mike, yes, or Leticia, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay for me, so I just want to make sure we're just doing quick intros, yeah?
Yep, just quick intros.
Okay, it's really great to see everybody. It's so exciting to be here. I just want to say earlier, I found a cover of a Highlights magazine that I used to read as a kid, which is now considered vintage. Okay, so there's that, but super great to be here. I'm Leticia Hernandez Linares. I'm the lead author of this book, and I live in the Mission District of San Francisco, where I've been for about 25 years. So gentrification and displacement is something that I deal with on an everyday basis as a neighbor and resident, as well as my own personal battles with it. So I'm very passionate about the topic. Should I pass it to someone? Okay, Rob.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I totally got my wires crossed and was like, oh, it's gonna be 7 o'clock West Coast time. I'm from Oakland, California. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the illustrator of Alejandria Fights Back, and I'm from Oakland, California, but I'm in Las Vegas right now. And it is a pleasure to work with all these people, as always. It's been a pleasure to make this story, and it's something that's been happening around me my entire life. So to finally have a picture book that kind of discusses this and illustrates it for children and families is just, it's really beautiful. So, Mike.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Leba. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. I've lived here for about 10 years. I am a lot of things, but I guess primarily I'm an organizer, and I work at an organization called City Life Vida Urbana. I'm a co-director there. And I was one of the organizations, the people who helped write Alejandría Fights Back. And yeah, it's really, I'm super excited to be here. It feels like a very full circle moment. And I'm here for it. So it's really nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me. I'll pass it to you, Jisoo.
Hi everyone, I'm Jisoo. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from the New York metro area where I've lived for about 10 years since moving here from South Korea. And I work at the Feminist Press. We're the publisher that gets to publish Alejandría Fights Back. Originally, we kind of got turned on to this project through Rob, who was doing art for a different activist book of ours, a kind of poster collection. So I don't know, we're a mission-oriented press, and so we kind of love these serendipitous community based projects. That's why we're here, and I'm so excited to keep the conversation going tonight with y'all.
So very excited to be in the company of this stellar cast of people who brought this book to life. Mike, first question I have is for you. I want to talk about this unique collaboration between artists and advocates, and I want to talk about it from both sides of the equation. So for you, as someone who primarily identifies as an advocate and not necessarily a professional storyteller, you and the cohort members, all of whom also primarily identify as activists and advocates and not necessarily professional storytellers, came up with this world, right? Came up with the majority of these characters, with the sort of the bones of this plot line, and began to conjure the vision of what this book would be. And I'm curious what that process was like, because I imagine it wasn't usual for you to sort of be at the origin of a creative project at this scale. And yeah, I want to hear more about how you experienced that.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about this today and thinking about how Alejandría, like us all, have just changed so much. So we started writing Alejandría in 2018, actually in Detroit. That was when the first kind of idea kind of emerged. And the book, like Luisa was saying, actually, I should take a step back. Like Luisa was saying, there are a number of organizations. There are about 7 organizations that focus on housing and racial justice that contributed to kind of the process of taking Alejandría Fights Back from this kind of seedling of an idea to to something to where it is now, where it's actually like a full hardcover physical thing that I insist on including on all of my Zoom calls. I keep it in close reach. But yeah, so it started to come together in 2018 when we kind of started workshopping the idea. It was actually, the idea of doing a children's book kind of came from an idea from a housing justice convention in Atlanta. And it was originally a spoof book, and actually, I'm not going to share what it was a spoof of, but the working title was Alejandría and the Very Bad, No Good, Awful Landlord. And then, several years later, through this whole process, as you all know, like in this process, you kind of start with an idea and then you keep working on it and keep working on it, and it just completely changes. And so there was a certain point where, we started fleshing out what the characters look like and what Alejandría was feeling and what Parkwood was. And, all these things were like genuine, real things for us. Like it was no longer a spoof at that point. Like Parkwood became Boston and Oakland and New Orleans and Atlanta. And Alejandría became the image of many of the young folks who I see in my organization every day. So this book is just like such a important organizing tool for somebody like me. And it really is just a labor of love. And if we have time for it, if we don't, it's okay. But if we have time for it, I have like a 60-second kind of quick clip just to show what it looks like to be on the front lines of a housing struggle every day. So I'm going to go ahead and share that.
You're broken hearted, tired.
Why should I have to go with no fault? I haven't done anything wrong. I pay my rent on time.
And you can't find the fighter. But
I'm gonna stay as long as I got city life and all you behind me. I'm gonna do whatever it takes to stay. I will not be moved.
We don't want you to be displaced, and we're here to say that this is not right, and we will not be moved.
And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do the 1,000 times again.
I didn't have any other choice but to fight because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I was gonna fight because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. So. And I'm gonna help as much as I can. City Life need me to do, I'll be there for them. That's right.
And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world.
Yeah, so that's that was Rosa Poincy. She's a grandmother. She has 3 grandkids who would often spend time with her grandma, especially when her mom was at, or their mom was at work. And Rosa and her grandkids, they're the face of displacement in a lot of ways. And just every single day we see people who come in, you know, in a moment of crisis and real uncertainty in their lives, and fully, you know, they transform in that. And the kids are doing it right alongside the parents. And so for me, you know, being a part of writing this book really is, you know, it's a full circle moment to be here at Highlights, but it's also a full circle to put kind of ink to paper to show what that transformation looks like in a very real way. So.
That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that video. It's really, really special. Rob, would love to ask you about also this, and both Rob and Leticia obviously ask you to sort of comment on the same aspect of this, but you're bringing the artist or the storyteller side of the equation. And how was this process of working with real life organizers and advocates and folks who are representing people who've had this lived experience that is the sort of undergirding this story? I'm just curious if you had worked in that way before. I think you both have, and I'm wondering how this sort of fits in with that.
Well, for me, beyond just working in children's books, I've worked in public art, doing murals for many, many years. And I've had a chance to work with schools, nonprofit organizations, coalitions, committees, like a lot of different people who are working towards a campaign or a goal and trying to make some artwork that really amplifies that goal or illustrates it in a way that people weren't necessarily seeing before. So that wasn't new. But to be able to do it for a kid's book, that was all brand new. And so it was really challenging in a good way to kind of understand some of what, you know, Mike and Rose and some of the other organizers go through day to day, and really hear what they're saying as far as advice and the story direction, and like make the art reflect that. Yeah, that's what I can think. Leticia, what do you want to add to that?
Well, a lot of what Rob usually says resonates with me. I would add to that the process, how was it? It was exciting. I don't do the same kind of public art that Rob does, but I do a lot of community-based and engaged sort of projects. And so that part wasn't so unfamiliar. And the challenge, the creative challenge of taking what is really a very personal experience in my own family's battle against eviction and my own daily kind of navigating of the witnessing of what it's like to be in one of the ground zeros of gentrification in the Mission. It was almost a relief to be charged with a higher calling, which was like, it's for everybody. You know, everyone has to see themselves in this, or wants to see themselves in this story. And that was just really exciting. And I think that the balance between those two things made it a bit lighter than it could have ended up being for me, if that makes sense.
And Jisoo, for you, what brought you, what was inviting about Alejandría to make you all want to be involved and be part of this unique project? What sparked you?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we are a kind of a mission-based publisher, which is just to say that we have like an explicitly political calling in the books that we publish, and we really want, you know, I think we are almost closer to Mike's side of work when it comes to like movement work rather than Rob's or Letitia's in some ways, because I think that as publishers we see ourselves as like shepherds and supporters of people's stories, and specifically those stories that might like deepen or, you know, complicate a conversation or introduce like kind of a narrative shift to audiences that aren't being engaged about these topics like housing justice, even though it's obviously a huge part of their realities. But then also, you know, when Rob sent over the kind of rough proposal and the art, I think we also just fell in love kind of with the art and with the story, and about, you know, kind of seeing this story that was both incredibly specific. I feel like it was really important to all of us that Alejandría was a real person, and her experiences and the dialogue and her neighbors were all rooted in kind of like someone that could be a real person rather than a composite of perhaps like, you know, diverse characters. But it was also incredibly, you know, in some ways universal. Like Leticia said, there's a lot of people who can perhaps see themselves in the character. And so, you know, I think for us, it's just been such an honor working on this project. We really believe in it as well.
Thank you. Leticia, I think one thing I wanted to ask you about as well, and you mentioned this, you know, sort of the part of this being a deeply personal story as well as a universal story in many ways. I think we all as artists are wary of sometimes doing the kind of being on a soapbox or doing like the public service announcement that that is really just politics forward and not necessarily strong on story. How did you find a way to sort of balance a highly creative, really compelling story with the real world issues?
Just that question. That's a very complex question. You know, I think what was very magical about this process was that, you know, as you know, we met together in the larger story committee, right? And there was a lot of brainstorming that went on. And that was exciting and also a little scary, right? Because then I'm like going back to the blank page and getting started to write the story with all these possibilities or ideas or asks. And then I still have to like write from my heart or from that place where my words come from and my stories come from. So it was like this hybrid, right? Of like, it was somewhat based on my neighborhood and my experiences and my people. And then suddenly it transformed into these new people. And so I think that the hybrid nature of the project opened a space for that for me. And I think that because I always approach projects like, okay, like there's me and my personal story and what I want to tell, then it's the impact I want to have and the representation I want to give. And because that's kind of a natural structure for me to create, it felt very natural as a result. And I don't think that, I mean, I'll just say, I don't think I'm the kind of writer or artist that is very dogmatic with my politics, and yet I'm a political creator. And I think the combination of organizers and orgs and campaigns with creative folks was just like the perfect match to pull that off, even more so, right? But thanks for that question.
And Rob, do you have anything to add to that? I just know that you also, with your creative process, had to balance those two things a lot.
No, I think she said it. Leticia hit it on the nail on the head.
So Mike, I think the part of this idea of using Alejandra as an organizing tool, can we unpack that a little bit more? I mean, I know having a cultural organizing strategy is a big part of the work that you do and is becoming even more of a part of the work that you do. Can you speak to that? Why is that so important, especially with an audience of young people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easiest way instead of telling you is to show you. So, you know, I held up this lovely, beautiful piece of literature, and right on the inside cover, you know, when we give out copies, my organization gives out copies of this book, we include information about, you know, if you are facing eviction, here's something you can do, an action you can take, here's support you can find. That's really important. You know, when we were writing this book, it was really important to be able to speak both to the child and as well as to the parent. You know, and a lot of times, you know, we are so immersed in like narratives and culture that sometimes it's hard to even pick out some of the things that are informing or kind of confining our thinking. And so, and this, you know, this is something that became really, really apparent to me during the pandemic, where like the immediate solutions that people were jumping to were ones that were really confined kind of by, we can't do that, we can do this here, you know, here's what's possible, and here's like, it just is what it is, and it's going to suck and blah, 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 you know, excuse my expression, but it's just, narratives inform how we understand the world. And if we are fixated on narratives of scarcity or inevitability, that, you know, you got, one of the things that we come up against like daily in our work is just like, well, you know, evictions, displacement, yeah, they suck, but they're just going to happen. And, you know, rewind to April of 2020, you know, a month after the pandemic kind of started to shut things down in Boston, we were able to stop every single eviction. The entire housing court process stopped for like 10 months because of the organizing that we were doing. And so that was an idea that was not in the realm of what's possible for so many people. But if we root our strategy and a lot of our tactics in new ideas, new thinking, and outside of this like confining, these confining narratives, then that actually opens up new pathways and new possibilities as a movement. And, you know, one of the things that just seeing how this book has shifted my organization, when, you know, we started getting physical copies, we actually, we have a really amazing young person named Tony, is an intern. He actually just started, I think, his sophomore year in high school. And he is somebody who came in as a movement kid with his mom, who was facing foreclosure at the time during the foreclosure crisis a couple years back. And he became our biggest champion of like getting this book out into the community and into, you know, his friends, families who, you know, might not have known that there was any other option aside from move when people tell you to move. And then, I mean, I guess the last kind of piece, which is just like a really, really concrete material thing, like I was thinking about how has this changed the culture within my organization? And I'm pleased to report that in the last several months, we've added a new high schooler to our board of directors. And it's just like actually creating space and room for young folks to kind of like organize their people and lead the charge and be visionary and be creative, because they're so freaking good at that. And, you know, so I really am just, I feel very lucky to be sitting watching the impacts, the fruits of all this labor begin to pop up.
I wanted to talk about representation a little bit also, Leticia and Rob, just about how important was it to be able to be writing and drawing Black and brown characters who are living through this experience?
I'll go first then. I think it's super important because as we know, the Cooperative Children's Center of Wisconsin, I believe it is, who does their statistics, like people of color are just hugely underrepresented in children's literature, and that means from the age when they are babies, you know, board books, up into middle grade and YA when they're high school and middle school students. So to go from being a baby to almost an adult without seeing a proper representation of yourself is detrimental, not only to one's sense of self-confidence, but their sense of, I guess, of understanding about who they are and who other people are in their community, whether they be in their neighborhood or not. And so to be able to illustrate a wide range of like what most of our neighborhoods look like, you know, very mixed with a lot of different people, was just, it was something that's like, I have to do it that way, you know. So for me, it was like, we're gonna do it this way. But also just like really incredible to be working with all this team of folks in like Leticia's story and Rice Home's story to give life to these characters that are just kind of leaping off the page and people who you know in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about this at the beginning, right? And I think that, you know, as a diverse coalition, you know, we all kind of bring the sort of stakes and communities that we want to represent. And then we're connected by the commonalities between those communities. And so I think that was a really important part of making decisions around the character. And, you know, I had to be reminded sometimes, because I do tend to write Latinx stories, and that is a main part of my audience, but by no means my only audience, that, hey, this is not just that, right? And that was growth, and that was great. And I think for me too, as a daughter of Central American immigrants, never having seen a little Central American girl in any book in English, in any book ever, actually, that was the only ask I had. I was like, that's important to me, that this character be Central American. And then it was also an opportunity to educate people about, and guess what? There are a lot of African and Black people from Central America and from Latin America. You just don't see it. So there were a lot of gaps and silences that we were trying to bring to light.
And Jisoo, I wanted to ask you about the importance of that for feminist press as well, because I know this fits into your very neatly into the body of work that y'all have that really centers Black and brown authors and characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think in general, in a lot of media industries and especially publishing, there's like this constant conversation around like diversity and how can we make books more diverse. And people have these like statistics about how much of their list is like creators of color and stuff. And I think I'm really excited by the fact that like I mean, maybe not all, like, but like 85% of my list is probably, you know, stories about people of color written by people who maybe don't have exactly the same experiences that they're writing about, but I don't think are completely imagining them either. And I think for us, like, I do think there's a way, kind of going back to your dogmatic question, like, I think there's a way to think about representation and diversity that just, that rather than being this like kind of dogmatic call to representation, we're just like enriching our story to make it better because we're writing about people we know and love. And that just happens to be these like very multi-ethnic, multilingual neighborhoods. I don't know, I'm sorry, I know that's not really an answer to your question. So I was like sort of thinking about something else, but yeah, I don't know. I think for us, it was just like always like, okay, we have this character. She speaks a certain kind of Spanish. We're going to be careful to make sure that, you know, the translated Spanish, because the book is bilingual, as I'm sure many people in the audience also know, is correct, not in the sense that it's like, you know, correct by some dictionary definition, but to make this character more of a real person, right? And that these experiences would be, I guess, all just part of that, like the craft of character development, I guess. So I don't think we see those two things as particularly difficult, and we sort of pride ourselves in thinking of them as the same thing.
And actually, on that note, could you talk a little bit about the importance of how the bilingual nature of the book was handled, even in the book's format, and some of the conversations behind that?
Yeah. You know, I don't know if originally in the proposal, I think actually maybe the proposal that was given to us was not bilingual. I think we suggested it, and then maybe the cohort was like, yes, that's what we wanted all along, but we didn't want to like ask for too much. And so it was like, I think, a perfect marriage, because I think as a publishing house, like, right, we also saw this book as like a resource, right? Like a kind of like educational resource. I mean, in the US, obviously consciousness raising is just a big part of many social justice movements. Publishing has always been a part of consciousness raising because you have to let other people know about things and also give them the language to learn about their, learn, I guess, about the situation that they're in and know that it's not a uniquely isolated experience that's just happening to them, right? It's not bad luck, it's like a structural issue. And if you live in a country where a lot of people maybe are multilingual, maybe are more comfortable reading in a language that isn't English, well, then you need to make resources that are also accessible and comfortable to them and their families. And so, yeah, I think we thought this was like, this would be great. This only enhances the kind of educational or informative nature of it. And just as like in a kind of fun, I don't know, like, I don't want to call it a gimmick because I do think it's important, but I also think that we are thinking about it in kind of a lighthearted way because it's a children's book. Why don't we have the Spanish come first so that there isn't this kind of, I think Mike was talking about, we don't realize how much certain narratives shape our thinking. Often English is prioritized in our everyday lives. The maps we look at are oriented towards a certain way. Why don't we kind of mix things up a little bit with this book to show that we're trying our hardest to subvert narratives that we might already have in our heads?
I will do a little historical correction there. We did actually have it planned to be bilingual from the get-go because of organizing considerations, and Mike was a big proponent of that. However, putting it on the same page and having the Spanish come first was very much feminist press contribution.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
So what I would love for you all to go around and tell me, like, in a dream world, is if Alejandría did everything you wanted it to do as a book, what would that look like on the eve of our sort of launching it into the world on August 10th? Just popcorn, whoever.
I think one of the main things is reaching people who need to read it, so like families, kids, for them to be able to, if they didn't already have the idea, like get a little bit of confirmation that we can do this. So that's really hugely important for families. And then I think it's also really important for the publishing industry to keep trying to push the needle in terms of like the type of stories they publish, because there are some people that will say like, this is too much for a kid's book, or it's too didactic, or it's too this or that, when children and families are already dealing with this anyway. So to like have a book that supports that real life experience is really important, that they should do more of that. Those are the two ones that come to mind. And I'll pick Jisoo to go next.
I think mine is very similar, but it's sort of, I think that when you see narratives that are close to your own reality, it kind of like normalizes something you're going through. And I think, just in my own experience, I feel like I've been in a lot of communities where something like eviction, or in general, just having a really unstable housing situation, is like a source of shame. And so you don't feel comfortable kind of admitting it to yourselves, much less looking for help or resources. And I think that there also needs to be a narrative shift around like, it's no one's fault, right? As an individual family that they are struggling with this, right? This isn't something like they did wrong. And I feel like hopefully one of the things that this book can do is add to a body of literature that destigmatizes housing eviction. I don't know if I'm using the language correctly, but I feel like everyone knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So I'm going to pass it on to Mike.
Yes, 100%. Agree with both. I mean, both of what you said. You know, one of my organizing mentors is really amazing person who departed a few years ago. He used to say, we have these weekly meetings, and in these weekly meetings, anybody who's facing housing instability can come. And we tell them you can speak to an attorney if you need to do that. You can speak to an organizer, but really it's good just to come and get to know other folks who are going through the same thing. And the organizer used to say to people, leave your shame at the door. Your shame is not useful here. You're welcome to pick it up on the way out if you really, really want to, but don't bring it, And in a way, having something like this book, to Jisu's point, it kind of eliminates that door barrier. It's like, this is a real issue that people are dealing with, and there's nothing shameful about it. It's just kind of, it happens to all of us at some point. So in a way, like, success would look like, one, definitely breaking down some of that stigma or shame that people feel, which enables them to find others and build collective struggle and to organize each other in our buildings and our communities. But I think the last thing that I'll say is that, behind this book and within the Rise Home Stories project, there's such an amazing team of people who are focused on impact. And there's some really amazing impact strategies. So in a way, even though this book has yet to be published, it's already being used for things that I would have never thought of. And it's just like so cool to watch. And I mean, my partner teaches ESOL at the City of Cambridge, people who are adult learners of English. And he started a 10-week module on Alejandría Fights Back. And it's, and it's so cool to just like know there are adults in this community who are reading this book and learning from this book. And, it turns out it's a really amazing book to build a ESOL curriculum around, because it does all kinds of amazing translanguaging and has all kinds of I'm learning all kinds of stuff that it's just an amazing piece of work. So I'm really excited to see it get out, and I know it's going to keep getting out even further. Leticia, you're last.
But not least. That makes me so happy, Mike, to hear all the ways that you're seeing the book have impact. I think that's definitely something that I am in the sort of success dream that I'm thinking about, both in terms of inspiration, but also in terms of emotion. I'm thinking about not just the young people who will hopefully be inspired that they can have a voice and that they can take action, but also the mothers and the titas and the adults. I sat with many mothers during my fight against eviction. And that was a really powerful and really emotional moment to just sort of like share and witness and sort of like the need to find courage and to fight the shame and the ultimate just horrible stress. Right. So I think that just to give, I think the mother in the book is a very complex character who was really hard to write too. Right. And it was like, but I find so much compassion for her. Having been her in a way. So yeah, I'm thinking about just inspiring both emotion and inspiration.
Cool. I think I'm going to start opening it up to some questions. We've got a couple in the Q&A queue here. So there's a question about how we approached finding the translator. Who wants to talk a little bit more about that?
So the translator, Dr. Carla España, she is an advocate and an educator in the New York City area, and she works on the East Coast. And she's also very active on the book world of Twitter, whether it be bilingual education or children's lit in general. So I've been talking to her for several years now, and we talked about some other books I worked on and just other things that she was doing. So when it came time to find a translator, she was one of the names that I wanted to throw in the hat. And she worked out incredibly, not only for the book, but just like her additional experience as a curriculum writer and like how to take that and implement the book when talking to young people and educators and adults and families as well.
Yes, and I think what's important too about this process, again, like everything else with this book and with the larger Rise Home Stories project, it's exactly that. Dr. Espana is a language justice advocate and brought that approach to the translation process. And that, coupled with this format choice to have it be bilingual on the page and have Spanish on top often, is, I think, all part of this thoughtfulness around how do we most effectively use this book as an organizing tool. So many creative and practical and strategic decisions were influenced by that. So I think that's an important thing for folks to understand about this process.
Can I say one last thing about
Also,
Go ahead, Leticia.
I just wanted to share, because I think it was in the chat and not in the Q&A, but there are teacher guides and community guides that Dr. Espana also worked on. So those will be available. I think you all have more information about that, but I wanted to make sure to get that in.
And the thing I wanted to get in, so I definitely, Dr. Espana is amazing, and I'm so glad that she was able to be a part of this process. And also, one of the things that is really beautiful is the book was bilingual even before we had a translator. Like I know what hormiguitas are, for instance, now, and you know, people ask me what are picos, or you know, so it's one of those things where, like, even before translation happened, it was a nod to multiple cultures.
We just got a question that, it's from Ivona, I think. You're talking a lot about what seems to me to be the adult POV. What about the child reader POV? Curious who wants to answer that.
I'd like to share a couple of things about that. First of all, a lot of us in the group took the story first, other than within ourselves, and sort of feedback and editing to readers, to kids, to get their feedback and their suggestions and critiques. And I did it in my neighborhood and in my son's school. And my son is actually an inspiration for Alejandria, because he did a similar thing. So I feel like there was a hefty amount of child sort of feedback and involvement in the development of the story. And then as we were rolling it out, what do y'all think? And I got a hefty stack of cards of opinions and suggestions, and it was great. Like, what a great process. And then I was able to go back, and in our first phase of community rollout, we were again sort of going back to those same classrooms and saying, hey, so here's what we ended up doing, and what do you think? And Rob and I have had some great meetings with different age youth, both elementary and middle school, and getting their feedback and their impressions. And yeah, so that was my 2 cents on that.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I'll just say that the story isn't called Alejandria Fights Back for nothing. Like, I think all of us, as like whether visual or writers or organizers, we all wanted the young person Alejandria to have some agency in the story. So it's not just adults saying, you should do this, and then her, it's not just that. It's like her taking the initiative to really find out what needs to be done next, and to take the next step. So when you read the story, you'll be able to see, like, it is from a kid's point of view, and like most children, it has adults involved in their family life.
And just to add one more little quick thing is, I remember at one point when somebody is complimenting Alejandria, and I had originally written in one of the many drafts I wrote, that she responded the way I would have, like with embarrassment or self-deprecating, in those kind of ways that we internalize. And then someone on the team was like, no, that's how we were trying to show something different. And that was an amazing moment for me, and saying, right, that's the default. Let's create a new default, which is like, yeah, like owning it. So that was just one concrete example of the way we kind of retrained our brains as adults.
And I will say, in general, I do think it is hard sometimes to edit with a children's point of view in mind, because, I think as adults, we have a lot of like memories or ideas of how children think or what children find interesting or uninteresting, that it is just like kind of hard to know in general what your reader is going to do. But I do feel like we did try really hard to balance what we thought were quote unquote learning moments. Like, how can we subtly show like what is a landlord in a way that could still make for ultimately a fun story, right? Like, we wanted this book to be appealing to a reader. And in some ways, I feel like if you're successful at telling like a good story that's dynamic, both younger and older readers will like sort of pick up on that. But I do want to like everyone's been saying, it was a constant back and forth, lots of editing and self-editing, and like, okay, maybe we have to cut out some of this because it's not that it's too complicated, but it like kind of clutters up this like narrative, and would a 9-year-old care about this and X, Y, and Z.
Thank you for these very thoughtful answers. We have one more question, which was, are there ways to get many books to an organization like community grants? So our impact team, if you could get in touch with us directly at info@risehomestories.com, our impact team can answer that question in greater detail, because we're in a community rollout period, and then we're also publishing on August 10th. So, and our impact producers are looking at community partnerships. So, well, with that, I wanted to thank everyone for this amazing conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Allison again to close us out.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I want to give a very special thank you to Louisa and Mike and Jisoo and Leticia and Rob, and really the entire Rise Home Stories creative team. We had the opportunity at the Highlights Foundation to peek in on a few of the creative discussions that were happening. And the energy was amazing during those talks. And I can't wait to hold the book in my hand, because I know that energy has transferred to the pages. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you to our Highlights Foundation team as well. They make events like this possible for our community. And thank you all for attending tonight, all of our attendees. I really do love the themes. I think they're so much a part of the Highlights Foundation. We talked about impact and empowerment for kids tonight. I'm so grateful. You could also share this really fun and fascinating and like really energy rich way of community-based approaches to bringing a story together. It's really wonderful. So I hope everyone here will help us spread the word about the Rise Home Stories projects. I hope you'll take a look at some of the links that are in the chat tonight and follow through on them. And please help us support the project, the stories, get the book into the hands of kids and caregivers. And really, more than anything tonight, we wish you safety, we wish you peace, and we hope you have a good evening. Thank you all for being here so much.